So there are at least two puzzles that give rise to this question. What is distinctive of pictorial representation? First is about meaning, the second is about perception. And they are not independent. So you can think of these puzzles as often coming together, and it's really a matter of emphasis in someone's mind. Which of these puzzles is guiding their theorizing or the answer that they give to the main question most? That doesn't mean that there are no other questions and puzzles in the philosophy of pictures. There's, for example, the question about the aesthetic value of pictorial representation. Is there a distinctive kind of value associated with representation in pictures? Is representation itself responsible for a kind of visual delight? Is there a pleasure that we derive from looking at representations of things? It's an interesting question. To me, it seems that that might be a little far-fetched to tie this delight merely to the fact of representation. Because you could think there are lots of really plain pictures. If I go through the IKEA catalogue, I like the furniture, sure, but I don't really like the pictures, unless they might be quite well staged, for example. But there are lots of pictures that are just purely communicative and dull, not aesthetically interesting at all. So it seems that in the cases where representation is a source of visual delight, and I think there are such cases, something more is going on. And you can ask what exactly is going on. Some of the answers that people have given have to do with the way an artist is actually recruiting the medium or the material she uses to make the picture in the representation, so that the material realizers of the representational meaning of the picture themselves enter into your experience of the picture. A really good example is, of course, Rembrandt's painting, where he uses paint in a way that is unmistakably present in your experience of the scenes that he represents. And that play of materiality and representation is delightful to experience and undergo when you look at his paintings. So there you would have just one answer of how representation can be a source of visual delight. So we have a central question: how do pictures represent? We've got two big puzzles that both lead to that question. And I've mentioned that there might be more questions, less central questions to the philosophy of pictures. And then there is the issue of photography. Photography is, in many regards, special as a form of pictorial representation. So on the one hand, most people agree that photographic pictures are pictures. They are pictorial representations. They represent things. But once we accept that, we typically have to admit that they do so in quite a distinctive way. Photographs are produced automatically. There's a mechanical process if you use an analog camera, or a digital process that is not much different if you use a digital camera. So the result, the picture that is formed, is something that is generated without human intervention. And you see that in recent years, with the development of artificial intelligence, a whole new cluster of pictorial technologies can be added to the question of photography. So we've got pictures now that are produced without human intervention. What does that mean for their status as representations? Do they nonetheless represent in the same way as, say, a Rembrandt painting does? Or should we say that photographs represent in a different way? That's an important question. If we turn to the question of perception, we can again ask an interesting question. Is what you get to see when you look at a photograph different in principle from what you can get to see when you look at a painting? Some people have said that photographs are, in a sense, much like optical devices. They're a bit like looking through a telescope or a microscope. So you can actually see the object that is pictured when you look at a photograph, Whereas when you look at a painting, there is no case of actual seeing. All we have is picture seeing, the seeing that is appropriate for pictorial representations. This is an interesting claim. So it means that the access, in a sense, to the representational content or the meaning of a painting is less direct than the access that we have to the representational content of a photograph. Ask yourself if you agree with that. Ask yourself if you actually think that photographs have this special status. But it's an important complication to the entire discussion about pictorial representation, what to do with photography.